Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jai. Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamunatira Vanachari. Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribrajacacharya Astotra Satya Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Syamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Yamuna Devi Ki Jai. Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to ISKCON SanDiego Ki Jai. Does it sound okay?
Yes.
Okay. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanachamarandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarane. Tranadapi Sunichena Torah Api Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sada Hari. Harer Nama Hare namaiva kevalam, kalo nastyeva, 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 gatir anyata. Pangung langhayate shailang mukam avartayet shruting, yat kripa tamahang vande, Krishna Chaitanya Ishwaram. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by whose mercy even a lame man can cross over a mountain and a dumb man can recite Vedic literature. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And before I begin, please accept my humble obeisances. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha, kripa sindubhyaye vacha, patitanang pavanebhyo, vaishnavebhyo, namo namaha. We are here to listen to the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 14, text number 8. Ata kadachin nivasa paniya dravinadi anekatmopa jivanabhi nivesha etasyang sangsara tavyam itastatat paridavati. Ata, in this way. Kadachit, sometimes. Nivasa, residence. Paniya, water. Dravana, wealth. Adi, and so on. Aneka, in various items. Atma upajivana, which are considered necessary to maintain body and soul together. Abhinivesha, a person fully absorbed. Etasyam, in this. Sangsara atavyam, the material world, which is like a great forest. Ita tataha, here and there. Paridhavati, runs around. Prabhupada's translation: sometimes the conditioned soul is absorbed in finding residential quarters or apartments and getting a supply of water and riches to maintain his body. Absorbed in acquiring a variety of necessities, he forgets everything and perpetually runs around the forest of material existence. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. As originally mentioned, a poor man belonging to the mercantile community goes to the forest to get some cheap goods to bring back to the city to sell at a profit. He is so absorbed in the thought of maintaining body and soul together that he forgets his original relationship with Krishna and seeks only the bodily comforts. Thus, material activities are the conditioned soul's only engagement. Not knowing the aim of life, the materialist perpetually wanders in material existence, struggling to get the necessities of life. Not understanding the aim of life, even though he acquires sufficient necessities, he manufactures artificial necessities and thus becomes more and more entangled. He creates a mental situation whereby he needs greater and greater comforts. The materialist does not know the secret of nature's way, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 27. prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Due to lusty desire, the living entity creates a certain mental situation whereby he wants to enjoy this material world. He thus becomes entangled, enters different bodies, and suffers in them. So for my class, I have done some homework and found some nice words of Srila Prabhupada to help us understand the key concepts of this verse and purport. So since Prabhupada referenced the Bhagavad Gita verse, I took an excerpt from that purport. Two persons, one in Krishna consciousness and the other in material consciousness, working on the same level, may appear to be working on the same platform, but there is a wide gulf of difference in their respective positions. The person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that he is the doer of everything. He does not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature, which works under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. The materialistic person has no knowledge that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is the symptom of his nescience. He does not know that the gross and subtle body is the creation of material nature, under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as such, his bodily and mental activities should be engaged in the service of Krishna in Krishna consciousness. The ignorant man forgets that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as ISKCON, or the master of the senses of the material body, for due to his long misuse of the senses in sense gratification, he is factually bewildered by the false ego, which makes him forget his eternal relationship with Krishna. So one of the statements in the purport which I found significant is this statement in today's purport. Quote, "Not knowing the aim of life, the materialist perpetually wanders in material existence, struggling to get the necessities of life." So this, of course, reminds me of the famous verse that Prahlad Maharaj spoke to his father Hiranyakashipu. There's a series of 3 verses, very powerful verses. And here is one of those verses. Nate vidu swartagating hi Vishnu, durashaya ye bahir artamanina, andha yatandayar upaniyamanas, tepisha tantram urudamni baddha. Persons who are strongly entrapped by the consciousness of enjoying material life, and who have therefore accepted as their leader or guru a similar blind man attached to external sense objects, cannot understand that the goal of life is to return home back to Godhead and engage in the service of Lord Vishnu. As blind men guided by another blind man miss the right path and fall into a ditch, materially attached men, led by another material attached man, are bound by the ropes of fruitive labor, which are made of very strong cords, And they continue again and again in materialistic life, suffering the threefold miseries. And here is an excerpt from a purport to that shloka. The word bahi means external, artha means interest, and manina means taking very seriously. Generally speaking, practically everyone is unaware of the spiritual world. The knowledge of the materialists is restricted within the 4 billion mile limit of this material world, which is in the dark portion of the creation. They do not know that beyond the material world is the spiritual world. Unless one is a devotee of the Lord, one cannot understand the existence of the spiritual world. Gurus, teachers, who are simply interested in this material world are described in this verse as andha, blind. Such blind men may lead many other blind followers without true knowledge of material conditions, but they are not accepted by devotees like Prahlad Maharaj. Such blind teachers, being interested in the external material world, are always bound by the strong ropes of material nature. So as far as understanding the goal of life, of course, there is the very famous opening statement of the Vedanta Sutra, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. This word atata is interesting because the Vedanta Sutra opens up with now therefore, meaning something has already been understood, something has already been stated. So it is very interesting that the Vedanta Sutra opens with a statement, now therefore. Brahma Jigyasa, inquiry into Brahman. And of course, Brahman means the absolute truth, the spirit. For our next reference on this topic, there is the famous verse spoken by Sutta Goswami as he began to answer the questions of the sages of Naimisharanya, headed by Shaunaka Rishi. They had asked Sutta Goswami 6 questions. And so, in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavatam, Sutta Goswami begins to answer those questions. And there is this very famous verse, Kamasya nendriya pritir, labho jiveta yavata, jivasya tattva jigyasa, narto yascheha karmabhi. Life's desires should never be directed toward sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation, since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth. Nothing else should be the goal of one's works. Here is a purport excerpt from that powerful verse. Prabhupada comments, the completely bewildered material civilization is wrongly directed towards the fulfillment of desires in sense gratification. In such civilization, in all spheres of life, the ultimate end is sense gratification. In politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, and ultimately in religion or even in salvation, the very same tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly predominant. In the political field, the leaders of men fight with one another to fulfill their personal sense gratification. The voters adore the so-called leaders only when they promise sense gratification. As soon as the voters are dissatisfied, in their own sense satisfaction, they dethrone the leaders. The leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses. The same is applicable in all other fields. No one is serious about the problems of life. Even those who are on the path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam says that one should not live for sense gratification. One should satisfy the senses only in so much as required for self-preservation and not for sense gratification. Because the body is made of senses, which also require a certain amount of satisfaction, there are regulative directions for satisfaction of the senses. But the senses are not meant for unrestricted enjoyment. For example, marriage, or the combination of a man with a woman, is necessary for progeny, but it is not meant for sense enjoyment. In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda for family planning. But foolish men do not know that family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is search after the absolute truth. Seekers of the absolute truth are never allured by unnecessary engagements in sense gratification, because the serious students seeking the absolute truth are always overwhelmed with the work of researching the truth. In every sphere of life, therefore, the ultimate end must be seeking after the absolute truth, and that sort of engagement will make one happy, because he will be less engaged in varieties of sense gratification. Another very important statement in today's 5th canto purport is the following: forgets his original relationship with Krishna. So that word original is very, very significant. Again, the sentence or the statement from the purport: forgets his original relationship with Krishna. So, of course, this reminds me of a section in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya to Sanatana Goswami, which began earlier with Lord Chaitanya answering Sanatana Goswami when he said, Kayami, who am I? And as was quoted by Dravida on Monday's class, Jivera Swarupahoy Krishnara Nityadas, that we are the eternal servant of Krishna. So later on in that chapter, we see these series of verses which are very, very significant. Krishna Buli se jiva anadi bahir mukha, ataeva maya tare deya samsara dukkha. Forgetting Krishna, the living entity has been attracted by the external feature from time immemorial. Therefore, the illusory energy, Maya, gives him all kinds of misery in his material existence. Prabhupada comments, when the living entity forgets his constitutional position as an eternal servant of Krishna, he is immediately entrapped by the illusory external energy. The living entity is originally part and parcel of Krishna, and is therefore the superior energy of Krishna. He is endowed with inconceivable minute energy that works inconceivably within the body. However, the living entity, forgetting his position, is situated in material energy. The living entity is called the marginal energy because by nature he is spiritual, but by forgetfulness he is situated in the material energy. Thus, he has the power to live either in the material energy or in the spiritual energy, and for this reason he is called marginal energy. Being in the marginal position, he is sometimes attracted by the external illusory energy, and this is the beginning of his material life. When he enters the material energy, he is subjected to the threefold time measurement: past, present, and future. Past, present, and future belong only to the material world. They do not exist in the spiritual world. The living entity is eternal, and he existed before the creation of this material world. Unfortunately, he has forgotten his relationship with Krishna. The living entity's forgetfulness is described herein as anadi, which indicates that it has existed since time immemorial. One should understand that due to his desire to enjoy himself in competition with Krishna, the living entity comes into material existence. Then we see another statement by Lord Chaitanya in his instructions to Sanatana Goswami. The conditioned soul cannot revive Krishna consciousness by his own effort, but out of causeless mercy, Lord Krishna compiled the Vedic literature and its supplements, the Puranas. Purport: a conditioned soul is bewildered by the Lord's illusory energy, Maya. Maya's business is to keep the conditioned soul forgetful of his real relationship with Krishna. Thus, the living entity forgets his real identity as spirit soul or Brahman, and instead of realizing his factual position, thinks himself the product of the material energy. According to the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Yaya samohito jiva atmanang trigunatmakam paropi manute nartang tatkritang chavipadyate. Due to this external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks of himself as a material product and thus undergoes the reactions of material miseries. This is a description of Maya's action upon the conditioned soul. Thinking himself a product of the material energy, the conditioned soul engages in the service of the material energy in so many ways. He becomes the servant of lust, anger, greed, and envy. In this way, one totally becomes a servant of the illusory energy. Later, the bewildered soul becomes a servant of mental speculation. But in any case, he is simply covered by the illusory energy. Out of his causeless mercy and compassion, Krishna has compiled various Vedic literatures in his incarnation as Vyasadeva. So I just want to make a personal comment. I interrupt this purport. So here we see the importance of Prabhupada's books. Because if devotees do not go out and distribute Prabhupada's books, how are the living entities going to be delivered? They have to get these books. And these books will only go out. The conditioned soul will only get these books when great Mahatmas, great devotees, out of their causeless mercy and compassion, go out and distribute and give the books. We go back to the purport. Vyasadeva is a Shaktavesha avatar of Lord Krishna. He has very kindly presented these literatures to awaken the conditioned soul to his senses. So that is why we do book distribution. We're waking them up. Just as Lord Chaitanya would go out, Jeev Jago, Jeev Jago. So we are also following in Lord Chaitanya's footprints. We are waking up the conditioned souls when we give them one of Prabhupada's books. Unfortunately, at the present moment, the conditioned souls are guided by demons who do not care to read the Vedic literatures. Although there is an immense treasure house of knowledge, people are engaged in reading useless literature that will give them no information on how to get out of the clutches of Maya. The purpose of the Vedic literatures is explained in the following verses. So the theme of Lord Chaitanya now continues. Shastra Guru Atma Rupe Apanare Janana Krishna Mora Prabhu Trata Jivera Hoy Jnana. The forgetful conditioned soul is educated by Krishna through the Vedic literatures, the realized spiritual master, and the supersoul. Through these, he can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead as he is. And he can understand that Lord Krishna is his eternal master and deliverer from the clutches of Maya. In this way, one can acquire real knowledge of his conditional life and can come to understand how to attain liberation. Purport: being forgetful of his real position, the conditioned soul may take help from Shastra, Guru, and the supersoul within his heart. Krishna is situated within everyone's heart as supersoul, as it is stated in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddeshe arjun tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. As the Shaktavesha avatar, Vyasadeva, Krishna teaches the conditioned soul through the Vedic literatures. Krishna externally appears as the spiritual master and trains the conditioned soul to come to Krishna consciousness. When his original consciousness is revived, the conditioned soul is delivered from the material clutches. Thus, a conditioned soul is always helped by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in three ways: by the scriptures, the spiritual master, and the supersoul within the heart. The Lord is the deliverer of the conditioned soul and is accepted as the Supreme Lord of all living entities. Krishna says in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tvang sarva papibhyo mokshayashyami ma shuchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. In the purport to that Bhagavad Gita shloka, Prabhupada also explains ma shuchaha means don't worry, don't hesitate, and of course, don't fear. The same instruction is found throughout all Vedic literatures. Sadhu, Shastra, and Guru act as the representatives of Krishna. And the Krishna consciousness movement is also taking place all over the universe. Whoever takes advantage of this opportunity becomes liberated. The next statement by Lord Chaitanya, Veda Shastra kahe sambandha abhideya prayojana, Krishna prapya sambandha bhakti prapyera sadhana. The Vedic literatures give information about the living entity's eternal relationship with Krishna, which is called sambandha. The living entity's understanding of this relationship and his acting accordingly is called abhideya. Returning home back to Godhead is the ultimate goal of life and is called prayojana. The next statement by Lord Chaitanya, Abhideya nama bhakti prema prayojana, purushartha shiromani prema mahadhana. Devotional service or sense activity for the satisfaction of the Lord is called abhideya because it can develop one's original love of Godhead. Again, I want to emphasize original love of Godhead. That's a fundamental precept of Lord Chaitanya's philosophy, that love of God is already there within the heart of the conditioned soul. It is not something gotten externally. Potentially, every living entity has this ability to act as a devotee because that love of God, original love, is there within the heart. This goal is the living entity's topmost interest and greatest wealth. Thus, one attains the platform of transcendental loving service unto the Lord. Purport: the conditioned soul is bewildered by the external material energy, which fully engages him in sense gratification in various ways. Due to engagement in material activities, one's original Krishna consciousness is covered. However, as the Supreme Father of all living entities, Krishna wants his sons to return home back to Godhead. Therefore, Krishna personally comes to deliver Vedic literatures like Bhagavad Gita. Krishna engages his confidential servants who serve as spiritual masters and enlighten the conditioned living entities. Being present in everyone's heart, the Lord gives the living entity the conscience whereby they can accept the Vedas and the spiritual master. In this way, the living entity can understand his constitutional position and his relationship with the Supreme Lord, as personally enunciated by the Lord himself in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Vedaischa sarvair aham eva vedya. Through the study of Vedanta, one may become fully aware of his relationship with the Supreme Lord and act accordingly. In this way, one may ultimately attain the platform of loving service to the Lord. It is in the living entity's best interest to understand the Supreme Lord. Unfortunately, the living entities have forgotten that this is their best interest. And therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam says, Nate vidu swarantakating Vishnun. Everyone wants to achieve life's ultimate goal, but due to being absorbed in the material energy, we waste our time with sense gratification. And through the study of Vedic literatures, of which the essence is Bhagavad Gita, one comes to Krishna consciousness. Thus, one engages in devotional service called abhideya. And when the living entity actually develops love of God, he has reached the ultimate goal, prayojana. In other words, one becomes fully Krishna conscious, has attained the perfection of life. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.